Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea with TPS. Today, our distinguished guest is Dr. Achyut Shankar Nair, the Professor of Department of Bioinformatics at the University of Kerala. Today's buzzword in education is multidisciplinary. When we talk of multidisciplinary, we speak of institutions. But today we will meet a multidisciplinary professor. There is not a single subject on which he is not a professor of. His affiliation is, of course, Professor Department of Bioinformatics at the University of Kerala. But equally, he could be the professor of Carnatic music. He could also be the professor of history, and a bit of architecture. He could be a professor of education. He could be a professor of ancient culinary arts. He could be a professor of humanism, professor of literature, and even photography. And now, of course, he is also an aficionado with Facebook. The only irony about all this is that in spite of all this knowledge and experience and needs, he does not use a cell phone. Welcome, Dr. Achyut Shankar Nair.
Thank you. Thank you, Srinivasan sir. Very happy to have this chat session with you.
Okay, let us start with the first question. How is it that you are not using a cell phone? Is it a matter of health? Is it a matter of convenience? Or is it a matter of total disregard of one particular technology?
Actually, I'm a miser to the core. I don't jump into any purchase of any new gizmo gadgets. I wait and before I take a decision. In case of the mobile phone, what happened was I waited, but it caught up so fast and I was without it, and people were asking me, how can you live without the mobile phone? Then I suddenly realized I was doing something that surprised people. Then I thought maybe I should keep this on to entertain them. But to be very frank, I would like to tell you that of late it has become very difficult to live without a mobile phone, because the public phone booths are no longer there, and if you get stranded in some place, you don't have any way to contact anyone. And mobile phones are very special that, you know, your fellow travelers and all, you cannot ask them to give their mobile phone to make a call, even though that is very easy to do, but they suspect that we might do something wrong with it. So I'm having a very difficult time, but at the same time, I'm also enjoying, being very free and not being interrupted continuously when I do something that I enjoy.
Yes, anyway, that's interesting. I thought our viewers would be interested to know that, particularly because we don't have a cell phone, you don't have the WhatsApp. WhatsApp is now called the WhatsApp University.
Yeah.
Most of the knowledge that we acquire these days is all from WhatsApp. It may be contradictory, it may be fake, it may be illusory, it may be harmful to your health, so many things, but still we depend so much on WhatsApp. Like the old printed word, today WhatsApp is the Bible. So you are disadvantaged there also, but I suppose you can do without it. Well, coming to our topic, the universities of the future. You have been in Kerala University for many years.
Yeah.
There are two kinds of professors. Some or most professors who think that becoming a vice chancellor is the ultimate objective in their life, their ultimate recognition. There are other professors like Dr. Ayyappa Panikkar, who was offered a vice chancellor's job, and he refused it, saying he had many other things to do and he did not want to do it.
Yeah.
Which category do you belong to?
Well, instead of saying yes or no, I would say my primary happiness is melting into knowledge, new knowledge. But having said that, I do think that administering universities is, of course, a very, very important responsibility which nobody should shy away from. But there's a time for it, and you cannot direct your whole intellect into longing for it. I don't long for it. But let me tell you that if it comes to me, I could possibly prove to be a disaster. Like VP Singh said once about his own prime ministership, because you want change to happen, a lot of change to happen. So if I get an opportunity to lead the university system, I will be very happy to do that, especially once I am out of formal teaching responsibilities in my professorial career. And then you have to don another role. And this role is not something that I look down upon, but it is not an end in itself. And you don't look at your career as leading to it. So that is one opportunity. It has to be taken up if it is offered, if it comes around, so that you can serve in that capacity. But if you ask me what is the most exciting thing, I think it is very simple. It is reading a new book.
And teaching, learning, etc., etc.
Yes.
Your father has been a vice chancellor himself, and an excellent vice chancellor at that. So you must have imbibed some of it from him also. But you have heard the joke. When a good professor becomes a vice chancellor, you lose a good professor and get a bad vice chancellor.
Actually, my take is very different. If I'm into administering of a university, it is not my role as a professor alone that matters. I think I'm basically an engineer, electrical engineer. An engineer is able to look at a system from a very fresh perspective than people of other disciplines, because they have always been talking about efficiency, making machines faster, making machines less costly, making machines smaller, and therefore these skills can be called for, not merely that of a professor. But actually what you said is very true. A good professor is best left alone. I agree.
Right. So that balance has to be brought about, because administration is not something that you normally do. Maybe you do as a professor, but as chancellor's administrative responsibilities are much more. So what normally happens is, when you become a captive of the so-called specialist administrators who are around you, or the registrar, or you're somebody else who is supposed to assist you, they tend to take over, and that is what sometimes happens. And professors are known to be absent-minded also. Anyway, let me ask you the other question, which I mentioned how many things that you are good at. So how do you reconcile this in this world of specialization? People joke about, if you are a nose specialist, they say, which nostril? Or has it changed now? Is it possible for somebody to be a generalist or someone who knows everything and still excel in your career? What is your view?
Basically, this is not something that is planned. You fall in love. That is what really happens. I think it is an innate tendency. Certain people may have that innate tendency. I am actually very afraid to read books in totally new areas, because I might catch upon that and get an interest and start studying it. And it's very difficult to balance your time with too many interests. But luckily, I have been able to do some of it with some fairness to all things. There is a risk of you becoming very thin in each of these things that you do, rather than going deep. But ultimately, what leads me is happiness. If you are happy reading up something and talking about something, doing a bit of things in that, do that. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter whether people recognize you as an expert or a generalist. I really don't look at such recognitions. I pat myself on the back, and I know that when I'm happy, when I have made a few other people enlightened through my lectures or my interactions or debates or even on a Facebook discussion, I'm happy. And that is really what matters. I think that...
So it's more of a time management issue, is what you think?
On time management, I would like to say that passion manages time. If you are very passionate about certain subjects, then you are always able to find time to manage it. It is like falling in love. I don't think there is any lover worth his or her name who has said, I'm in love, but I don't have time to love. So I fall in love with certain subjects, then it manages my time. Automatically it manages my time.
No, but there are factors like health and convenience and family and all that come into
Okay, well, on that aspect, I would say on health, it is a very good thing to chase your passions, because then you will be happy and that will have a positive impact on your health. Number two, on managing energy and time and all other things, I would say my basic training as an engineer is very helpful. If you let me be immodest, I would say I have very, very clever ways of managing my office, managing time, managing my work. Actually, people don't ask me how I do all these things. They make their own.
Nobody has asked you, but we all wonder how you do it.
Well, actually, I use very basic industrial engineering principles in my office operations. So, if you know, in my department also, there is only one professor. And many people say that I run my department well because there are no others to fight with. But that is not true. Actually, I have great difficulty in running this department, my department. But how I score is I use very specialized methods which I learned from industrial engineering, do my engineering days. And there are certain principles which you use. You can generate time. I believe that we can generate time from the day-to-day activities and use it effectively. So, so far it has been good, and I've been able to manage. And I've done compromises on my interests. I'm interested in many other things too, but I've not been able to do that. As you said, there is a limit for everything.
Yeah, I read somebody great man saying the other day that as long as there is night, you cannot say you are not a.
Yeah, but I'm not a night bird. I actually get my work finished by 10:30. I don't work beyond 10:30, nor do I get up early and do any work. And I must tell you that I'm very good at delegating work. I plan work well and delegate it to people, and I'm very good at collecting it back and compiling it together.
And you have enough people to trust. Okay, that brings me to your department. What does bioinformatics do? Can you tell me? I don't know anything about it, but maybe our listeners would also be interested to know what exactly is the outcome of the bioinformatics department.
Okay, I will, because people from many backgrounds might be listening to me. I will say in very simple terms. See, life is one of the most complicated, beautiful drama that is unfolding on the surface of Earth. I do not know whether it unfolds anywhere else also. And such a very complicated, system cannot be studied by one subject. So earlier, biologists thought that they would study life. So they were called life scientists, and they thought that is their area. Nobody else need really worry about it. But in early 19th century, chemists said that, you need to know chemistry of life if you want to study life. And they started off a branch called biochemistry. In 1950s or 40s, physicists said, no, you cannot study life by studying either biology or chemistry. We need to study physics of life. Those people are called molecular biophysicists. And so what you see is you have biology, biochemistry, biophysics. Then can bioinformatics be far behind? It cannot be. So bioinformaticians are a group of people who said, if you want to study life, you must study information of life. And incidentally, there is tons of information that is stored in each of our cells. Bioinformatics is studying life based on the information of life stored in cells. To come back to the question that you asked, what is the output of bioinformatics? I will tell you a very simple thing. When coronavirus spread, the first thing that was done was its genomic information was read. And that information was compared with existing information. It requires a very, very sophisticated algorithm to do, which was contributed by bioinformatics. There is no life science in the modern times that can go ahead without the component of biochemistry, without the component of biophysics, and without the component of bioinformatics. I must say it is not a superior field of knowledge, but it is one window through which the drama of life can be looked at and get very unique perceptions. And many such windows are required to actually see the whole drama unfold. I hope I have at least
Yes.
common parlance, I have
You
answered.
outlined the connection, but the other next question then is, what do your students do after they graduate?
Well, if you're asking about their jobs, I will answer that. But before that, I would like to say I don't teach them to get a job. I interact with them. I mentor them.
There's something called scope for professionals.
True. I'm answering that. Yeah, I see. It's very practical. Your question is very practical. But still, I must say that my task is primarily to motivate them and have critical debates with them so that their innate intellectual abilities are woken up. And when a student walks out of my department with their intellect woken up, I don't see I should worry about what will happen to that particular student. Having said that, I come back to the very practical question you asked. It's very difficult to get a job in bioinformatics in Kerala. That is the very truthful answer to your question. There is a company.
Campus recruitment, no campus recruitment.
We have. Luckily, our department has only a master's program with a small number of intake. And these students mostly get employed in a company in Kochi, the only one bioinformatics company in Kochi. Many others turn to research and development institutions and into academics. But that is the picture in Kerala. If you go to the national level, there are opportunities, especially for the small number of students that are being produced. If you go to international level, the opportunities are enormous. And let me also cite the upcoming possibility. Computers being used to design drugs, including the design of vaccines for corona and for drug molecules for corona. All of this use computer systems. So a lot of pharmaceutical companies are there. They do employ bioinformaticians to design drug molecules. This is also coming in. I'm also very happy to tell you that during the COVID times, my department has been able to produce a research output which has been published and which has been listed in the WHO's COVID literature.
Well, in fact, today only I read an article by Rajiv Srinivasan, the Open magazine, where he talks about this. I didn't understand fully, but what he said was that now designing of medicines, pharmaceuticals, etc. will be done by artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And he says that is where the answer is going to be. He doesn't know. He says he doesn't know yet when this will happen. It may take many years. But it will go out of human hands, well, like many other things. So maybe your department will be one of those which will be pioneering in that.
Sir, before I respond to that, I must also tell you in a very comparable kind of a perception in your own field. You are a person who has been an ambassador in the United States. And the president there, my feeling was that after the election, I thought, it was a neck and neck race because of the very strange kind of way of electing the president he lost. That was a neck and neck race. That is my understanding. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it was. Still, he got 70 million votes, 73 million votes anyway.
But for the moment, just accepting that he was unpopular and he made unwise decisions, as seems to be the popular perception. The notion is that in future, if somebody like that comes, he will be advised by an artificial intelligence program. All decisions that he takes will be basically taken by an artificial intelligence program, and he will only nominally sign off those decisions. So not only in drugs, even in politics, artificial intelligence might come in. The farmers, the issue that is going on now, I think it would be a good choice they don't trust each other. The government and the farmers don't trust each other. And there could be an artificial intelligence program which could give a solution to what could be done with that law. So
even heads of states and heads of government will be replaced by machines. That's what
yes. Actually, the famous author of Homo Deus, he actually has predicted this quite a few years ago, that algorithms are going to rule the world. Already we find that partially they are doing it. Our personal lives are being ruled by algorithms. What post of Facebook jumps up first in your wall in the Facebook is decided by an algorithm. And that influences our daily routines.
And you cannot control it.
Yeah.
Like on your Facebook page, you can't choose who are appearing on that.
Yes.
I mean, you can do nothing about it. So that's something which often worries me.
I must also add that I accept your compliment for my department that will be pioneering. But let me, in the times of artificial intelligence, but let me tell you, ours is a tiny drop in the large ocean of artificial intelligence. So I don't see myself or my department as a pioneering department in the world arena, but hopefully we have produced minds which will go on to go to environments which can make changes in the world, and they will contribute. Through them, maybe our department will contribute. Our own department is actually a very tiny one.
No, on the other hand, you have this very sophisticated department.
Yeah.
And when I was in education by accident for a few years, I discovered, for example, when informatics was introduced as a topic, I don't know who introduced it in the new semester system.
Yeah.
So somebody in the university thought this will be done by English professors.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what has English professors to do with informatics? Because they thought it was information. And English professors were asked to teach. Actually, they were asked to teach informatics. And then I removed them all from that responsibility by saying that you don't do this. So did you know this had happened?
Professor Srinivasan, it is very difficult for me to comment on this because I myself am compromised in this particular situation. If I say somebody should not teach that subject, the first finger is raised back to me, and I will be told I'm an electrical engineer. All my degrees, my master's, my PhD, first PhD was in electrical engineering. How is it that you teach biology and bioinformatics? So, in fact, I would feel it would be unfair for me to make this comment because I myself have compromised on that particular aspect. But hopefully, what I would say is that if teachers are trained in the sense of an application level, informatics can be taught by everyone. And I think the compulsion is, as you very well know, you are in the helm of affairs in Higher Education Council. The compulsion is that Marx said only change does not change. The only thing without change is change. But I think the only thing without change really is the workload in the colleges.
Right.
And that has unless somebody can break down that notion, these kind of issues cannot be openly be debated. That is my personal take on it.
Yeah, because teachers are trained or educated, say 30 years ago. And then they are required to do various things within these 30 years when they are teaching.
Yeah.
Like when I did my English literature masters, I was taught Old English about people by Dr. Panikkar. I think his genius was wasted teaching us Old English, which was no value at all to anyone. Even for Old English, it was not worth. And this kind of thing, so he must have learned Old English simply to teach us and wasted his time. And now it's changed. But then they brought in other kind, American literature was brought in, then Dalit literature was brought in. Then how do these professors get accustomed to that? And how do they teach new things? Nobody bothered. And that was really one of the problems that I faced when it came to, fixing syllabus, etc., etc. Anyway, let us now come to some hard education questions.
Yeah.
Where do you think Kerala University stand in ranking in India? Not officially, in your own mind. You have seen many universities.
The Kerala University is my
Alma mater also.
alma mater and my breadwinner. But because I love my university, I would say I wouldn't like to rank the university in any way that will make anyone happy. So I wouldn't go into any numbers. The reason why I am saying is, if you want an institution to improve, you must first realize where it stands. So I have this analogy that if you want to go to East Fort, you need to know where you want to go, which is the route to go there. But there is also one more important thing you need to know, where you are. So suppose you stand in Palayam and you claim that you have already reached East Fort, you will never reach East Fort. So therefore, I think that it is very important for all people who love our universities to realistically assess where we are. So it can be assessed in your own ways. For me, the first assessment is, how transformed are my students when they come out of my university? At an average. And I am not happy with the transformation in the students. If it were so, a lot of great things would have happened to our society through our university. I envy some of the universities and research organizations world over, which I have visited. Some of them, when you walk in there, they say, this is our top 10 top 10 means, 10 things that the university did which has affected the society. So it might be a discovery, it might be a particular activity. And if you ask my university, what did you do so that the Kerala society has been changed? Then you can generally say, all these people went through our university, degrees have been awarded. You yourself said, you are a person who has great literary skills, but your talk seems to indicate that that was not what was taught in the college where you studied. You had something that was totally irrelevant being taught. So, as far as transformation of students is concerned, empowering of students is concerned, I think my university has miles to go. This I say due to my commitment to the young generation. I would be pleasing the authorities of the university by saying that our university is great. I will never say that.
Well, you and I did something together in the Kerala University. That is trying to bring some American students and spend a semester in Kerala University. Your experience was bad and my experience was also bad, and we had to discontinue it. Where do you put the finger? Is it the administration? Is it the morale of the teachers? Is it the cultural shock of the students? What is it that failed it?
Actually, I would like to make a small correction. I would say it was a very, very enlightening experiment that you introduced.
No, but the sponsors gave up.
No, that is a secondary issue. But I think primarily it opened eyes. For example, for me as a teacher, as a professor, it opened my eyes to what the possibilities of student diversity is. Basically, the point is in Kerala University campus, if student diversity can simply be defined as percentage of students who come from places other than the district where the university is held, then the student diversity of Kerala University is less than 1%. You have students coming from Trivandrum, Koilon district, mostly. From other districts, the number is very small. From other states, the number is even very, very small. Outside the country is absolutely small. And you introduced this program. I think, your uniqueness was that, you had been in diplomat in US, and I think that those connections and perceptions helped to get this program done. That is a very important thing. I sit here in Trivandrum and just wish that 15 American students come, they don't come. But you did that particular part so easily, and you introduced a system to get these students over here. 15 students came. When you learn something, you would say, for example, when you learn fishing, you at the end of the day, you ask, how many fish do you have in your hand? I don't have any, but I know to fish. Sir, I know to run a campaign.
Because you put the fish back into the water. Still
yes. But you asked where do you point fingers to? I will say, if the political leadership, I always, my conviction is very firmly in place. Political leadership understands that our universities have to grow. Our students, our human resource quality has to increase. One of the things they need to do is to increase the diversity of our campuses. And if they decide, all this will happen. There won't be any issues. But what was happening in the Semester India program was that you were there, of course, at Help of Affairs, and you initiated, you gave this idea, you made all these connections. However, it was being run inside the university, and the university's leadership needs to be very passionate about this happening, and then it would have happened. Now, in our country, in our state, if the university leadership has to be passionate about something, then the political leadership has to be passionate about the same thing. Only then their passion is awakened. That, unfortunately, hasn't happened. It is even now not happening. When that happens, the such programs will run very successfully. And I have, for your information, I would like to say, I have documented every bits and piece of that program. I'm yet to publish it. But when somebody wants to start it again, a lot of lessons have been documented.
The most delightful story I heard from you was about clearing all the stray dogs away from the university.
Very much.
The first girl who came out of the car picked up the nearest stray dog and started embracing it.
What a great lesson that was about my...
Yeah, but that means we don't have intercultural understanding. That's what it shows. All of us have been abroad, but we don't absorb the variety and diversity. Here, if a student comes into your class and put his foot on the desk, you will walk out.
Yeah.
So if you do that, then you will never be able to teach them. They will sit the way they want.
Even wearing a cap, I think, most teachers take exception to that and make an issue of it.
No, this is after they have been abroad, not that they were educated in Trivandrum all their lifetime. It's not so.
Yeah, true. I was thinking, I myself, I've traveled widely, from England to China. I've never been to US for some reason. But to me also, it was very, very awakening because, going to another country, the kind of mindset is very different. But when 15 students came to my department and they wanted to study there or be centered there, then my perceptions took a, they were challenged, and I'm sure it was a great learning experience, very great learning experience.
No, but I had another problem. These students who are sent by the ICCR, foreign students, the general tendency of the university was to say no. Some excuse or the other, and their fees are paid by the government of India. They are brought here on scholarship. And they will say, oh, this degree that they have brought is from Fiji, and it is not. We don't know where Fiji is. And they used to reject. Out of 360, we would get say 11 or 12 people to be admitted in the university. So it's a big challenge for us.
Actually, you might remember during your time there was an international students meet that was organized. I hope you remember that.
Of course.
And the stories that the foreign students told, it was terrible to listen to. One student said, why do you have foreign students in your university when the teacher teaches in Malayalam in the class? So what more to discuss? If this is happening, basically, you are disrespecting this international studentship in your university when you are teaching in Malayalam. And I think that our student organizations were better tuned with the foreign students. The student organizations came and requested me to send these students to their homes. The leaders made a special recommendation. And they especially invited them and had a special session for Western music so that one student could sing. But the leadership and the administration, I think they would like to reject these students because it is a lot of hard work. Once a foreign student is admitted, a lot of queries would come, even intelligence inquiries would be made. Why have all the headache, just reject and,
And we have many Iranian students, the most sensitive nationality that you can think of.
I actually would like to hear your take on it. My understanding is I had one Iranian student who completed her PhD and went back to Iran. I have great admiration for the Iranian students who came to me. One PhD student and other master's students also. They're very nice. They respect India. They love Indian culture in many aspects of it. But I feel very sad and bad that they were looked down upon as sometimes, very, very blatantly. There were officers who said they are terrorists.
Exactly. This is what I was saying. The kind of political impression, the CIA mentality that we have. If Americans don't like them, they are not good. But today, even after I left education, I have 2 Iranian students corresponding directly with me every month or so. And they want to come back. They were both graduated from Srijitra. And Srijitra doesn't want them. And they are very keen to come. And
this is that boy Amir. I think I know him. He loves Malayalam music, film music. It is so warming to see that this person adapted to Trivandrum so much. It is like his hometown. And
he's not able to come. Nobody is giving me a visa. Nobody is giving me a scholarship. Nothing at all. So this is the situation. Anyway, coming back to world-class universities. Everybody asks a question, from the President of India to the lowest employee of Kerala University will say, when are we becoming a world-class university? Have you studied this, the criteria, the choice, etc.? And I have done some, but I'd like to compare that with you and see whether there is any scope for us to become world-class, even in the first 300 or 500.
Sir, you give me a very easy question to answer, first of all. The basic answer is our universities cannot become world class as long as they are led by people who have never walked through the portals of even the best institution in India or Kerala. If they are going to lead us, then how do you expect it to be? Do you think that a party, uh, district committee member can lead Kerala University to a world-class university?
So with the syndicate.
Yeah. I don't want to point fingers at them. I must say that I respect them as very
Involved and
human beings.
agitated.
They're good human beings, they're friends. But I am very sorry, I cannot agree that you can lead the university. So that is point number one. Now, regarding parameters, I would like to say, if you look at, yes, I have studied universities. I've compared parameters very precisely. I've during my time as quality assurance director, I published a small booklet as well, which must be available on the IQAC website of Kerala University. So, number of teachers, number of students.
No, they start
diverse
number of Nobel Prizes. That's how they start.
That all is an output. I would say, if you look at basic numbers, number of teachers, number of students, size of campus, the
library.
Cost of library, cost of the scientific infrastructure that they have. If you look at all of that, you will find there is no way that we can catch ourselves get caught in the international radar. You say we have 250 students, teachers in Kerala University, which is actually a very good number now. We earlier, for a long time, we were hovering around 160, 150. Now we have 250 professors. That's very good. But compare it with Stanford, Oxford, or Cambridge, you are talking in terms of thousands. You have 2,500 professors. Students.
Per capita, the number, the proportion. So a professor might be teaching only about 10 people, right?
Yeah. And then the infrastructure, for example, you said about Nobel Prize. There's a joke about Nobel Prize. You don't need to think about Nobel Prize unless you have a publication in Nature or Science, in scientific field. Other fields I don't want to mention.
The Lancet for medicine.
Yeah. But to get the publication in these journals, it seems somebody did a research and found out that if your laboratory has got so many equipments worth more than so many millions of dollars, only then that publication is likely to come there. So by that logic, what you do with, you talk about story of C.V. Raman, who did all that he had to with less than 1,000 rupees. Unfortunately, that might happen once in a while, but unfortunately, most of these prices go to very cutting-edge, sophisticated based on sophisticated instrumentation. But I don't say that is true for economics, for example. An economic theories can be built out of air. This is my feeling, but I don't want to bet on it.
Literature you can do, provided you translate it into English.
True, and make it wider. And we have examples of that. We have Arundhati Roy and Aravind Adiga and all that.
No, Tagore himself, he got the Nobel Prize because he himself translated Gitanjali to English.
Yeah. So what I would say is that if you take numbers, look at the campus size. Kerala University had 600 acres of campus. When it was 1962, when the Karivattam campus began, it had 600 acres. And today, we have managed to reduce it to 350.
You have given it away to various organizations.
Yes. The argument is that you come into the university, you find that there a lot of space is vacant, it's not being used. Why are you wasting? We will do something. But then, look at the university in Delhi, Jawaharlal Nehru University. In Delhi, which is far more costly land than Trivandrum, they have 1,000 acres of land. Banaras Hindu University has 3,000 acres of land, and last 5 years it acquired 1,000 acres of land. We have 650 acres of land, we gave away 300. And we gave away to a company which set up a stadium there, and it was said that after 15 years the stadium would be given to the university. But if you go there, you can see a pub there, you can see a cinema theater there, you can see shops there, shopping complex there. Is it going to be given to the university? Absolutely not. So our notion of what a world university is not there. That is simply because of the people who are in help. And they are saying land which is vacant is being wasted. But university is a perpetual organization. And 100 years from now, you would see possibly in Karivattam, there would be a Hadron Collider. There would be a Buddhist research center. There would be a satellite launching station, student satellite launching station. If you have such vision, you won't give away this land. But that is where I said, it is not people with such vision who lead the university.
So what is the answer? Have our own ranking and find out how much we are
No,
doing. Not worry
sir.
about global ranking.
Yes, sir. It is not the obsession with ranking we must have. At certain other point, we can worry about ranking. Now, I look at ranking in two ways. One, ranking is good in the sense that it helps you to take stock of things. But,
And also to ambition. What can be your objective? What is it that you want to be?
Yes, but taking that will not help you to improve the university if the basic things are not being done. So if your university continues to be led by a person of not academic brilliance, who does not have a higher education vision about research and innovation, who has not seen world universities and how they operate, then no amount of attempt to get into the ranking will be of any use.
But I can tell you that experience doesn't help in Kerala. They don't look at your global experience or anything as of any value in education.
Sir, it will change.
My own experience.
Yes, sir, it will change. I will tell you an example. The Kerala University Karivattam campus, it borders the Technopark. In Technopark, all these experiences are respected by politicians. They even have permitted some amount of undemocratic things in the campus. For example, when a Bandh comes, they don't actually enter the Karivattam campus. But in Kerala University campus, professors cannot enter. So that means political leadership is capable of understanding this.
And you think that happened because of the Technopark?
No. That happened because I will tell you very precisely. If you read the book, the biography of, biography of G. Vijayaraghavan, you have the answer there. The Chief Minister, Mr. E.K. Nayanar, went with him to US. He visited Silicon Valley.
Yes, I received him in my own home.
Oh, I see. Okay. So you know what happened. You know what happened there.
No, I don't know what happened. But I'm just
remembering. Actually, he went to one of the companies, Apple assembling unit. He visited along with Vijayaraghavan, and it seems he made a characteristic joke before he entered. He said, it was said, we'll visit Apple factory. He said, why do you want Apple factory? Because apples would simply grow on trees. Why do you want a factory for that? So he went in there and he saw a lady assembling computers, many women assembling computers. That itself seems to have impressed him. See, the politicians are actually, they have very great vision. If they're educated, they will learn. So he was first impressed with that. Then he asked Vijayaraghavan, how much pay does this lady get? So somebody asked him, it seems she was a Brazilian lady, and she answered something. They translated and said $6. So Mr. Nayanar converted it into Indian currency and said something like 350 rupees. They said, see, capitalist exploitation, paying just 350 rupees. And Vijayaraghavan told him, sir, that is for 1 hour. I think that was the defining moment for Mr. E.K. Nayanar to change his perception about IT. He had so far not IT.
You know also what happened in that visit? He went and signed up for this laboratory here, and he came back and wrote back saying that this is CIA, I don't want it. So
this is John Hopkins, is it? You're referring to John Hopkins.
Exactly. Dr. Umni's case. Yes. So that means, even if you have a vision, when you come back into the system, you will be told this is CIA. That is the problem.
True, but still, Technopark is an exception. That the whole idea got translated, and Kerala University and Technopark also is like that. Kerala University had a valley called
in which he is participating. That was set up by his students, and they are paying him every month.
Yeah. Now, since you asked, I would like to tell my woes. In 2005, I initiated a company of my students in Karivattam campus itself for 2 years. I was attacked fiercely when a strike was there, saying that I have brought capitalism into the university campus. And everybody from student leaders to the syndicate members were a part of it. They ran a lot of stories. They sent out anonymous letters. But as you might know, I don't turn back once I put my feet forward. I pushed through. I talked to all of them. I convinced them. And it ran. It ran for 2 years. Professors are involved with Technopark. None. Because if that has to happen, the political leadership will have to wake up and understand that synergy, that organic...
Also, we don't have enough patents in the universities, right?
These are all a
You have to
follow.
have a patent first in order to cash it.
Yeah, these are all a part of the whole problem. You don't take out patent alone as an issue. But I will also narrate what happens if you apply for a patent. My department has 2 patents. Very small number, very humble thing. But first time I applied for a patent in the university, 5 years the university never replied. I kept on sending reminders, and one day the syndicate met and formed a subcommittee to study this. Now, unfortunately, that was the end of it because they can never understand what it was.
No, by then 20 people would have found that same process and registered their patent.
Yeah, it was actually, after all, it was a very small thing and it was an experimental thing. I wanted to know how this process of patenting was and how the university would take it. It was an experiment. But now through projects, we are able to register the brunt. But today, I'm very happy to say Kerala University has about 10-15 government or political leadership cannot stop it.
Okay, now we're coming in because I don't want to, because both you and I have been speaking about it all around the place. So I don't want to repeat all that.
Yeah.
But just outline to me 3 good points and 3 bad points about the policy. Can you put it like that?
Okay. I will start with positive points. I think that basically this policy is moving towards an American model, which is not essentially bad.
You don't also use the word liberal education.
I will come to that. That is also a positive point. It is American model is also liberal bachelor's degree, liberal education, where the flexibility of having like 3 majors or 1 major and 2 minors and 4-year
years, an exit program.
4-year program and multiple exits. That is good. But the namesake structure, the way you implement it really matters. But anyway, I'm not going into that now. So it has been a liberal education model has been adopted. Even an engineering college cannot be teaching engineering alone.
IITs, even IITs.
Both of these are good points. And the setting up of MERUs, giving importance to humanity, very good thing to happen because it is going to encourage the quality of these disciplines or the pride of these disciplines. That is very good. And there is a national research foundation where teachers can compete for funding for research. Normally, we huge organization with 800 patents.
But you know the counter to that. The counter to that, this is saffronization.
No, saffronization is an argument which is not related to this. That is generally, actually, I heard this word partisan from you many years ago. See, it's brought forward by BJP, then it should all be wrong. Or if a policy is brought forward by another party, it is all right. I cannot look at that. I look at my basic common sense, look at the policy that is proposed by the government.
No, but when I'm saying that this ability for the government by which you bring in things which they would like, this is the criticism.
Sir, this criticism is namesake. If the government wants to control our research, they can do it with existing system. Why do they have a National Research Foundation? They make a committee, put the people that they have influence in it, in the current system itself, and they can fund. They can announce schemes to fund what they like. So that is already there. So this is only a namesake kind of criticism, I would say.
Please go ahead. Other positive points.
Yeah, but to say, I'm very surprised why the word secularism was dropped from the policy. When you refer to the fundamental aspects of the constitutional secularism, they could even do after including that word. Why is the word taken away?
Moment a party is called People's Party, then the people are excluded.
Yeah. So that is very concerning to me. I would say, why should a value that is accepted by the Constitution? To me, that is the highest law of the land, and you cannot move against it. Why it was dropped from it, I do not really know. I just hope that it won't be acted upon, that it has been missed this one point and whether it can be acted upon.
But that is in the Constitution. So whether it is in the education policy or not, that is not going to make a difference.
Okay, I hope so. Then another thing is that the university administration setup is going to be changed. There will be a board of governors. And at the top of the board of governors, there will be a chairman. And so the universities no longer will have a unique central point. The vice chancellor's pride and authority is going to be reduced due to this system. So, and
like the central universities, is that going to be like that?
Like IITs.
Yeah, right. Governing board. Yeah.
And maybe I should go back and say a negative point. affiliation, taking away the affiliation.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, it's a good thing, very good thing to happen. But
Same here. I have been arguing for it before.
yeah, but I would say practicality requires that you have some sort of affiliation, a special system for that. My recommendation for it is that you have a affiliating university which will only affiliate, do nothing else. It will be more like a board of examination, one per state, and that would affiliate any college which wishes to remain affiliated.
Then you don't interfere in the day-to-day running of the college, approvals, blah blah, which goes on all the.
No, this will be mostly exam conducting
No,
exams.
I have the experience of autonomous colleges. The universities became so possessive about their colleges that they wouldn't let the autonomous colleges to function.
Yeah, but according to the new policy, I think that may not be possible.
I agree. But what I'm saying, so I welcome this very much. And affiliation is not there anywhere in the world.
Yeah, true. I completely agree with the idea to do away with affiliation. I'm only worried that it takes about 10-15 years, for that to happen. It should have happened even earlier. That is my suggestion.
Okay, the last point, foreign universities coming into India. This has not happened. One contradiction there is we say that we will only accept the top 100 universities in the world.
Yeah.
That is too ambitious. Top 100 universities may not care for you, but there are hundreds of good universities which you can have. That is one correction we used to make. When you don't have one university in that 100 list, how can you insist that only those 100 will be allowed to come into India? That's not very fair. But foreign universities come. You know what happened in Kovalam and all kinds of manhandling took place. And that was on the point that they misunderstood that I was asking foreign universities to come. I was not. I don't know you know that. I was saying we want to interact with foreign universities. I kept saying foreign universities bringing them is not my job, that is the parliament's job. Yeah. But let us use the foreign universities, talk to them and have cooperative programs. That's what we said. Yeah. That itself was anathema in Kerala. Yeah. But in the rest of India, it's going to work. Don't you think so?
Yes. I will first like to make a comment about what happened in Kovalam. I think you must have noticed that in turnaround last year or early this year, the government of Kerala has proposed that there will be an education hub coming up where foreign universities can operate, private players can operate, and they can charge any fees.
That's our own paper. That was my paper that they were talking about. But they don't talk about private universities there, though. They say universities should come.
Yeah, but still, it looked like not consistent with the political philosophy of the present government.
Even autonomy now they are saying is good for engineering colleges.
Yes. So what I'm saying is what happened to you at Kovalam was merely a typical drama that unfolds in Kerala. That when you are not deciding, then whoever decides something that you would have also decided has to be attacked and has to be demonized. That is what has happened.
Like it happened in the case of the nuclear deal on the international level, I'm saying. See, the nuclear deal was actually negotiated by Jaswant Singh. Mm-hmm. But when the Congress party wanted to sign it, BJP opposed it. So I told Jaswant Singh, you would have signed it if you had a chance. He said, no, but I didn't have enough time. So the Congress should not get it.
Yeah. So, these games happen. I think we need to ignore these and look at the core of the matter in hand. Well, in principle, I would say it would be very nice to have foreign universities around. When they are around, that will produce a competition. Initially, it is going to be very tough for the universities because we have no level ground. Foreign universities have come with a great tag of international quality, and they have too many things in favor of them, and all of a sudden you are required to compete with them. So I was thinking that in Karivattam they open a campus. In Karakuttam, University of Cambridge opens a campus and say, here is our MSc Computational Biology, and I am all of a sudden required to compete with them. They have 10 professors giving lectures there, and they have latest gene sequencing machinery that is accessible to students. We will have a problem.
Yeah, but you will have to catch up. Look at the banks.
Yeah.
Look at the State Bank had a token. For 10 rupees, you have to give a token and wait.
Yeah, true. But what I'm saying is, what we have to do is, political leadership has to educate its own cadres and people that this is good for the society in the long run. that when we have a competition, we will live up to it. We will grow. We will universities. Then that is one occasion when the political leadership will decide, okay, our universities cannot be fighting or competing with these people unless its leadership and vision is changed. And hopefully it will bring a transformation to the Indian universities. But I don't rule out that there are a lot of issues like some values that our education system has cherished, like for example, access to education. Will it be that these
The
universities
high fees and things like that. But those should be rectified. In fact, we are telling foreign universities that they cannot take profits back.
Yeah.
Still, they're willing to come. So they are not coming to make money here.
Yeah.
So if you give them reasonable proposals to support poorer students, or give them reservations on the basis of our own constitutional requirements, they are not going to shy away from it.
Yeah.
My feeling is that they are coming here to use this India, which is a large laboratory.
Yeah.
They are not coming here to make money. The experience that they will get, Harvard University gets by having a campus in Mumbai, will make a huge difference to their own potential.
Yeah. Actually, I would also like to comment, for example, people who say that the rich are going to benefit. But the rich will anyway benefit because they will go to US and UK. Then what happens is your foreign exchange will flow there. But if they come and operate here and you go and study there, this money of the rich people will get circulated in the Indian economy itself. These things have to be debated threadbare rather than clinging on to your political philosophies. You have to really talk about it. Finally, I would like to say, what about economic liberalization? Various parties in various political spectrum might have shades of difference, but is there a party which says we don't have economic liberalization?
But aren't we now moving back after COVID?
No, point what I'm saying
is Atmanirbhar and all that, and we have protectionism is creeping back in.
Yeah, sort of. But what I'm saying is there is a shade of difference in opinions. But is there a political party which says we don't want economic liberalization of any sort? No. So what I am saying is that approach should be there in education too. I heard a very prolific speaker once speaking in the India Education Festival, saying that if we can agree on freeing Mahalakshmi, we must start thinking of freeing Saraswati also. So I think some sort of liberal approach should be tested out very carefully. All the concerns which are being raised by opponents are very serious concerns and they need to be addressed. But I wouldn't say that because of those concerns, we must say no to any entry of foreign universities.
Well, that's a good conclusion. Only thing is the government of India is giving 20 years for this. That means one generation will not get the benefit of this. That is my sad thought at the end of studying all this. Because the moment you give it 20 years, then it'll drift. Yeah. But the Prime Minister has said, at least for the schools, he wants it by the 75th anniversary of India's Indian Republic. So let's hope that works out. And the plan policy is good. I think everybody recognizes that. But the devil is in the detail. Yeah. And the devils will keep popping up. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ajit Shankar Nair, for this very delightful conversation.
Thank you, Srinivas.
I know it's always a delight to talk to you, though I don't get much of an opportunity to do so.
Same here. I enjoyed having this chat.
This is a bonus. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.